Hello and welcome to the overview of the Literacy Outcomes Framework webinar from the Office of Early Childhood and Literacy Pre-K to 12. This webinar is intended for teachers in grades 6 through 12. My name is Marcia Roach and I am the ELA Manager for grades 6 through 8 from the Office of Early Childhood and Literacy. In order to make this a more interactive and useful experience, it is recommended that this webinar is viewed either in a whole group setting or as grade level or content area teams. There will be opportunities to stop and discuss with your colleagues and administrative team, and we want you to take advantage of this time. Our learning outcomes for today include: I can understand the 5 W's of the Literacy Outcomes Framework. I can explain how the Literacy Outcomes Framework will be used by teachers. I can analyze the progression of a standard using the Outcomes Framework in order to understand how it will facilitate instruction. And I will plan the next steps with my colleagues and administrative team for using the Literacy Outcomes Framework for instructional purposes. I want you to take a moment and reflect on your current instructional planning process as we think about the Literacy Outcomes Framework. All of the blocks that you see on the screen are important components when we think about planning instruction. Effective teachers use all of these to plan. Purchase district programs, the Ohio Learning Standards, student behavior, IEP goals, assessment data, and district priorities. Which one tends to take the lead for you when you are planning instruction? Why is that? Pause this to discuss with your colleagues. How many of you, while you were reflecting, were thinking that you use the Ohio Learning Standards regularly to drive instructional decisions? Here's what you and I know about good instruction. It's important that we meet students at their zone of proximal development. Vygotsky explained that students learn best when they are receiving instruction that has the right balance of not being too frustrating or too easy, but right in the middle so students are being challenged, but it's attainable. We cannot forget that the mastery of the grade level standard is also important. The Ohio Learning Standards were designed with the purpose that students master set skills before moving on to the next grade level. Even if that means we are reaching outside of our students' zone of proximal development, we have to take into consideration the Ohio Learning Standards for the grade level. This is in consideration of the College and Career Readiness Anchor Standards, looking at what students should know and be able to do by the conclusion of 12th grade, and back mapping from what students need to know in order to be college and career ready. It's important then to provide opportunities during the literacy block where instruction is aligned to standards while still providing other opportunities to teach students at their zone of proximal development. What tool can we use to help balance this? The Department of Early Childhood and Literacy knows that you are working hard to meet your students' needs. We want to help increase alignment of instruction across the district and provide you with a resource that will make all of this possible. So we have created the Literacy Outcomes Framework. Now, we are going to take a look at the thinking behind the framework by answering the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why. We will begin with what, as it's the most important part for all of you as you're beginning to understand the Literacy Outcomes Framework. We want to look at the thinking behind the framework before actually exploring it, so that you have a good understanding of the reason it was created and really how it was created. So what is the Literacy Outcomes Framework? It is part of the literacy toolkit provided by the Early Childhood and Literacy Office. It's used to support what instruction is taking place during the literacy block. It is a framework aligned to the Ohio Learning Standards that includes the learning outcomes for the grade level standard. It is a planning tool for teachers. It is not an evaluation tool. The purpose is to help plan instruction so that your students can master the grade level standard. There's a possibility that after an evaluation by a leader in the building, the Literacy Outcomes Framework may be used as a suggestion to look at additional ideas and strategies to use to support students in being successful with a specific standard. Hopefully, if you're already using the framework, this recommendation will not even be needed. The Outcomes Framework allows for vertical planning, so you can see what happened in the grade before yours and the grades after to know what standards and outcomes your students should have mastered and what they are preparing for subsequent grades. It allows for in-depth planning as well at the specific grade level standard. The beauty of the framework is that it can be used with any curriculum or text that you already have. Because the Literacy Outcomes Framework is aligning instruction to standards, you can select texts that match the standards. A scope and sequence of standards will be coming out from our office soon, which will provide even more support of a recommended progression of standard instruction. The Literacy Outcomes Framework includes all of these features, from vertical alignment, standard explanations, to strategies, resources, and student exemplar work. We will be taking a closer look at each of these features momentarily. The framework is designed to be used for grades K through 12. It covers all of the literacy standards, including RL, RI, writing standards, speaking and listening standards, and language standards. It also includes reading fluency standards for the primary grades. Right now, our office is focused on the work for K through 12 standards. We do, however, have a plan in place to begin the same framework for pre-K as well. So why was the Literacy Outcomes Framework created? Our office invited in a leader in the field, Tim Shanahan. Tim Shanahan has been a member of the National Reading Panel, and he provided feedback to our office on our literacy practices in order to improve instruction. He gave positive feedback about the literacy framework block created for grades K through 3. He did suggest we continue to create a framework that includes the upper grades, which was important feedback we were aware our students and teachers needed. He also asked if we had an outcomes framework in place. In other words, how did we know if students mastered the grade level standard? We know that we experience a lot of transience in the district. So we also wanted to know, how do we know if students are receiving the content of instruction at one building compared to another? This framework would help provide consistency across the district, because regardless of which textbook series is being used, all instruction when using this framework is aligned to the Ohio Learning Standards. It's also a way to keep the ultimate goal of literacy instruction in mind, for mastery of the grade level standard and ultimately building up to mastery of the anchor standard when graduating from high school. This is a tool for instruction for all ELA teachers in grades K through 12, and as mentioned previously, eventually pre-K as well. It is also a tool for principals and other instructional leaders to access expectations and suggested practices for each grade level standard. Who created the Literacy Outcomes Framework? The framework is being created by a team of individuals, all of them on the screen. Megan Valerio, a literacy consultant, has been working with the Office of Early Childhood and Literacy in order to spearhead this project. Along with Megan, Nicole Vitale, Marcia Roach, Rita Duda, Tracy Inman, Michael Glebe, Megan Metz, Aaron Shakur, and Raquel White, as well as Sue Ellert and Dory Kadage, have all been working together to produce this document. During the next several years, we would like feedback and recommendations from administrators and teachers to strengthen the tool even more. We want this to be a useful tool, so it will be a living and breathing document that is revised and edited over time. It is recommended that all teachers in the district in all ELA classrooms are using this tool as they plan instruction, both during whole group instruction and small group instruction. Veteran teachers and even brand new teachers will find benefits in using this tool in different ways. For instance, a 6th grade teacher who might like clarity on Writing Standard 2, writing informative, explanatory text to examine a topic and convey ideas and information clearly, could use the Outcomes Framework, W2 Standard Explanation, in order to assist and find out what 6th graders need to learn more and need to know exactly in terms of the standard. A 7th grade teacher may find that his students are unsuccessful in the RI Standard 2, determine central ideas or themes of text, and analyze their development and provide a summary. He could access the Outcomes Framework for other instructional strategies to help students to master the standard. It is also recommended that content area classrooms use the framework because even the content classrooms are using literacy standards to attain their own standards. In 6th grade through 12th grade, we have the RH and RST standards where social studies teachers and science teachers, as well as those of technical subjects, have informational reading standards very closely aligned to the RI standards. And those are helping students to read the way that those in the discipline read, to learn how to read like a historian or read like a scientist. Using this framework can provide those teachers with strategies to increase literacy in their subject as well. We know that literacy skills follow us everywhere, so really all teachers can use the Literacy Outcomes Framework. Even though there are not standards laid out in 6th grade through 12th grade for mathematics that touch reading content, we know that there's vocabulary skills essential in math. We also understand that in order to be mathematicians, students need to be able to have math literacy. The Outcomes Framework is really there for all of our teachers and all of our content. The Outcomes Framework will be accessed eventually through the CMSD website. Currently, we are going to house the framework in our channel, in our team. More information will be provided through our newsletter and sent to schools throughout the year as we are updating and rolling out pieces of the framework. We are now going to take a walk through the Literacy Outcomes Framework in order to show you what it looks like and explain each of the features closely. You will then have an opportunity to interact with how the Outcomes Framework can be used and to become more familiar. The Literacy Outcomes Framework will be organized by anchor standards. That means if you are teaching RI1, you will locate RI1 and then be able to access all of the grades and resources under RI1. The standards are grouped together by grade level bands, including K-2, 3-5, 6-8, and 9-12. This allows for vertical planning, keeping mastery of the grade level standard in mind and easy access to what happened before and where students are going. This also helps with scaffolding when students are in a place that they are struggling in order to achieve the grade level standard, and they may need to take a step back with teacher support in order to achieve a skill that maybe they were lacking when they entered that grade. The framework is color-coded for organizational purposes so that it's easier to find and track your grade level. What you see here is the first page of a specific standard. This example is of RI Anchor Standard 3 for grades 6 through 8. This first page is designed to give the reader a snapshot of what the standard looks like across these 3 grade levels. Let's look more closely at this first page. On the top left corner, you will see the Literacy Priorities box. This box lists the 4 district literacy priorities that have been identified to strengthen instruction. The priority the anchor standard aligns the best with will be starred. The front page will also include the anchor standard. It's really important for teachers and instructional leaders to keep the end goal in mind, that this is what each grade level standard is building up to So when students graduate from Cleveland high schools, they have mastered this anchor standard and they're ready for college and careers. It might seem unnecessary that a kindergarten or first grade teacher would need to know what students need to master by the end of 12th grade, but it's actually the contrary. Those earlier grades are setting the foundation, and that foundation needs to be taught well and mastered for students to be successful in later grades. So 12th grade may seem really out of reach to a kindergarten student, but mastery is starting to take place even at that young age. Now you will see that specific grade level standards are included. This front cover allows for the vertical alignment to be easily seen so that teachers can see what was expected before and where students are going. When you get into some of the writing standards in 6th grade through 12th grade, you'll see that there's so much information that they cannot fit all on one page. For some of those, the 6th grade and 7th grade are on the front page, and the 8th grade is on the second page. Underneath the grade level standards, you'll find the standard explanations. These are included on this page to also allow for vertical planning to see what the standard means in more detail. We will take a closer look at this in a moment. Finally, we have the learning outcomes on this page. Now, for a lot of the 6th grade through 12th grade, the learning outcomes are on a second page just because we ran out of room to put everything on the first page and have it be in a readable font. But when you access this, you'll be able to see that the learning outcomes are laid out together. A teacher can easily see what is expected at his or her grade level to demonstrate mastery of a standard and compare that across grade levels. In many ways, this is helpful in laying out the number of days or weeks that will be essential as you're working toward achieving mastery in a standard and what that step-by-step might look like, also helping you identify what different assessments may be essential as you're looking at what students need to know and be able to do. I'd like you to take a few minutes right now to pause this webinar so you can talk about your first impression of the outcomes framework. What do you notice right away that will help with planning instruction? Stop and talk with your colleagues now. Following the vertical alignment page is the standard breakdown by grade level. The color for each grade level matches the color that you saw on the vertical alignment page. Let's take a closer look at what you will find here. On the top left corner, you will see the literacy priorities focus, which matches what was shown on the front cover. It's important to know what focus the standard aligns to so you know which needs of your students you are meeting. Now we see the grade level standard is included. The anchor standard is not on this page because the sole purpose now is to know what is expected to demonstrate mastery of this standard. The standard explanations are found next. The standard explanations do just that. They explain in depth what the standard really means. This is a great place to read for information about what is expected at the standard to ensure your students are mastering the standard in its entirety. Know that some standard explanations are shorter than others, depending on the demands of the grade level standard themselves. Keywords are italicized and bolded to jump out at you as important words that are needed to unlock the standard. When you are looking at the standard explanation, if you teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, you will notice the distinctions among the 3 different grade levels. Many of the standards look very similar across those 3 grades. Some look quite different. In the standard explanation, you'll see the little details that are really delineating for us what's essential in 6th grade and how it's built upon in 7th and in 8th. This is so noticeable as we get into some of the writing standards where we see that thesis is brought out in 6th grade. In 7th grade, we have new skills that are being addressed. We should already have spent a good amount of time on thesis in 6th grade, so we shouldn't need to devote as much in 7th. There, in 7th grade, we're devoting more time to developing a detailed introduction, a detailed conclusion when we're writing essays. Same thing that we'll see in reading. When we're in the reading standards, initially in RL and RI1, we're supporting students to be able to cite explicitly what's stated in the text and then also to make inferences based on what the text says. When we're doing that in 6th grade, we have to at least do it one time. In 7th grade, we have to do it multiple times. And in 8th grade, we have to be able to identify the most important details of the text. So this standard explanation really spells out the difference from each grade so that it can help us continue to guide students as they're climbing the stairs toward that 12th grade standard. The learning outcomes in the literacy framework. The learning outcomes are essential to instruction because we want to answer the question, what should my student know or be able to do by the end of this lesson, or possibly by the end of this week? Know that a learning outcome may take many days or weeks to master, but it sets a purpose and goal for learning the standard. The learning outcomes are written as I can statements because they are written from the student's point of view. We want students to take ownership of the learning and use this statement or the multiple statements with support from the teacher, of course, to state what they have learned. Note that the example you are seeing has 3 learning outcomes. Some of the standards have even up to 5 outcomes. Know that you may be working on one learning outcome at a time, or depending on your students and progression of the lesson, you may be working on all of them for one standard. We also know that standards are not taught in isolation. You could have an RL outcome paired with a writing and speaking and listening outcome all within a lesson because you're teaching all of these standards. While the pace and number of learning outcomes may fluctuate, it's important to remember the expectation that students are supposed to master all of the learning outcomes for their grade level by the end of the year. Mastery of learning outcomes means mastery of grade level standards. The skill progression feature allows teachers to see in simplistic form the sequence of steps needed to get to mastery of a standard, or in some cases, a substandard. Sometimes we read a standard and right away think, my students can't do that. This helps to break it down and see a suggested process to build up to mastery of the standard. Think of this as a great tool to use for differentiated small group instruction as well. Let's say you modeled and practiced during shared learning, a grade level standard. You found that many of your students were at different points on the path to mastery. Each of these skills listed in the progression then becomes different small group instruction topics to help your students work toward mastery of this standard. This may also help you as you're setting up, thinking about a unit plan, the number of days or lessons needed in order to reach growth toward mastery in a skill. The academic language section suggests words that should be taught and used in order for students to get to mastery of the grade level standard. We want students to know and use these words, which means the teacher should also be using this language during instruction. You may want to consider displaying these words on a word wall, creating sentence stems for writing and speaking, helping students to use this academic language, possibly having a posting of these words. If you're doing small group instruction and you have a table where you tend to have students coming and working with you, you can focus on some of this language. Know that to help students become proficient with word use means that if words are on display in your room, they are being used regularly and not on a poster on the wall and not being addressed. One of the best ways to help students to incorporate this language into their writing and speaking is to provide sentence stems to guide them in that usage. This covered the information from the first page of the grade level standard. Now we are going to walk through what comes next that can be used to help with instruction. The next part of the Literacy Outcomes Framework is the Instructional Strategies. This section includes recommended research-based strategies that align with the grade level standard. The strategies have come from a variety of resources: the Ohio Model Curriculum, the McLaughlin and Overturf Common Core Resource Guide, Jennifer Saravallo's Reading Strategy Book and Writing Strategy Book, Fountas and Pinnell's Literacy Continuum text, and What Works Clearinghouse, just to name a few. The point of this feature is to provide recommendations to work toward mastery of the standard. Let's say you taught RL Standard 1 and many of your students did not show mastery. You might go back to this section and find a new approach to try that you haven't thought of before. Or maybe you're uncertain where to begin for teaching a standard. Maybe you're new to a grade level, or a brand new teacher, or new to a content area. This framework is a great place to go to get suggestions. Please know that these strategies are not the only strategies available. We would like to continue adding to this resource, so any research-based strategies you may have during the year, please feel free to send to the Office of Early Childhood and Literacy so that other teachers in the district can share from your knowledge and experience. Next, we'll take a look at the instructional resources. For each grade level standard, we are building instructional resources to use that link to the standard. These will come in the form of PDFs, websites, videos, and more. This standard has 5 instructional resources. Some of the standards include 10 resources or more. We are continuing to build this up so teachers have a variety of resources to select from. You will see in this example that we have linked some graphic organizers and strategies for questioning. Our office is also creating some of our own resources. One of our goals is to support explicit instruction of skills and to provide tools that help teachers scaffold learning and teach strategies that gradually release responsibility and independence in learning to students. Sometimes we give students tasks that look like worksheets and activities when what they really need is help in adding learning tools to their toolbox. We're hoping to be able to do that in these shared resources. In the Evidence of Mastery section, we wanted to answer, how can my students show that they have mastered this standard, and what does mastery look like? We have provided suggested ways that students could demonstrate mastery of this standard. Oftentimes, these are related to the instructional strategies for the same standard. We were thinking along the lines of, when I am finished teaching this strategy, how will I know my students learned the skills of the standard? These are suggestions for mastery and are not the only ways to demonstrate mastery. As mentioned a few moments ago, your feedback and suggestions are extremely valuable. Any feedback and suggestions from all of you only makes this tool a better resource for Cleveland teachers and students. The last section of the framework is for student exemplar work. We want to display evidence that Cleveland students have mastered a standard. For some standards, this may be in the form of writing, a picture, or even a video. If you are familiar with the Ohio Model Curriculum, then you know that there are student exemplars located there. While we appreciate and utilize this resource, we want a tool that shows that Cleveland students are mastering these standards. We want the outcomes framework to be for our district and to reflect mastery of the standards with our students, not in other districts. We'll be calling on all of you this year to collect examples of student exemplar work to send in. So please stay tuned for more information this year and be thinking about this while you plan instruction. The grade level section ends with provided references. You can use this information to look closer at resources if needed. We also want to demonstrate that everything within this framework is research-based. At this time, I would like you to pause this video to stop and discuss with your colleagues. How would this tool aid in planning instruction for your students? Now that you know the 5 W's of the outcomes framework and understand each of the sections, We want you to have time to interact with the standard from beginning to end. Please listen to further directions from the person facilitating this webinar on how to access RI Standard 3 for K through 12. Once you have located the outcomes framework for RI 3, listen to the next slide to set a purpose during your exploration. Please pause the webinar now so everyone can locate RI Standard 3. You should be able to find this in the Early Childhood and Literacy team in Files. You are now going to read through RI Standard 3 documents from K through 12. I recommend that you start with kindergarten to track how the standard progresses. You will use this time to read through the standard in order to then answer with your colleagues and administrators. How do students become proficient at analyzing how and why individuals, events, and ideas develop and interact over the course of a text? What new learning was explicit and individual to you by reading through RI 3 from K through 12? Please take time now to read through these standards and answer these questions with your colleagues. It would be of most value for you to pay close attention to the grade levels that you instruct and to identify the way that student learning builds each year. The Literacy Outcomes Framework is important for our district because we want students to receive instruction that aligns to the Ohio Learning Standards. We also want teachers and leaders to have access to excellent resources to help with this alignment, which was the intention of the Literacy Outcomes Framework. We want to share with you the Office of Early Childhood and Literacy's timeline for ensuring that all teachers in K through 12 have access to this for this school year. In August, the K-5 ELA Outcomes Framework will become available to all over the next couple weeks. As we enter into September, we'll be collecting student exemplar work to start to fill out that section in the K-5 framework. We also will be rolling out the middle and high school RI, RL, and writing standards. When we enter into October, we'll continue the collection of student exemplar work. There's a tentative goal that the middle and high school speaking and listening and language standards will be completed and available to all in October. We will also begin the work on the pre-K outcomes framework in October. We appreciate the time you and your colleagues took to participate in this webinar. With the remaining time, we recommend that you talk now to discuss how you plan to use this outcomes framework to drive instruction within your school grade level and content area. We thank you for your time and attention and your commitment to CMSD. Thank you.